Good day, good day, good day, good day. Like they always say in Australia, good day. Before you know, I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the part of the globe you are. But well, my Australian friend told me just say good day, it suffices. So good day to the seven continents of the world. We're here again. It's another Friday. Now, today we're talking about a book, a book that some of you have heard of, some of you might not have heard of it, but it is a must for people, especially of African descent, to read. And how do you talk about a book without the author? Yes, I have the author here, Professor Chidi Anselm Odinkalu, the author of The Selectorate, When Judges Topple the People. Prof, welcome to Atlanta Discuss.
Thank you very much, Ade. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're most welcome. So, well, our tradition will go for the jugular straight because when you talk about a book, there's a lot of intellectualism involved, and we have a lot to learn, considering the fact that the judiciary is in play. I mean, we all know why it is, but we just need to get clarity. Some of us might have a good understanding of that, but let's hear from the author. So my first question to you, Prof, is can you elaborate on the concept of Judicial Selectorate, and how it has impacted majorly on the Nigerian democratic process?
Thank you. This, I mean, if you read the book, actually, I try to do just that in the acknowledgements. This a kind of book that's really been there for quite a while. There's a personal dimension to the story, but also it's the personal basically meets the political and the jurisprudential, which is not as recent as some may imagine. The fact is, since 2003, judges have been deciding Nigeria's elections for the most part. As a matter of fact, in 2003, they sent at least two people to the Senate who had lost elections, knowingly lost elections. And in one particular case, in the Anambra South Senatorial District, the election was won in 2003, the election was won by a man called Nicholas Ukachukwu, who today actually, in 2003, Nicholas Ukachukwu was a member of the PDP. Today, he is the candidate of the APC for the governorship election in Anambra State. At that time in 2003, he was a member of the House of Representatives. After he won, he was declared as having won the election. INEC then administratively 2 days later changed the result and declared Ugochukwu Uba as the winner. The interesting thing is that Ugochukwu Uba never ran for the election. He was not even the candidate of the PDP. How did he become the winner? His brother, Anduba, was a very powerful presidential insider then. That's his immediate younger brother. And another brother, the one after Andy, Chris, otherwise known as Eselu Uga, was the self-declared godfather of Anambra State politics, and is the man who claims to have installed all the people in Anambra State who won elections, including the then state governor, the person who was declared in that election, Dr. Chris Ngige, who subsequently fell out with him and then subsequently was abducted, forced out of office, reinstated, eventually got deposed by the Court of Appeal in Peter Obi's case. That's the story of how Peter Obi eventually emerged, but that's different from what I'm trying to say. Now, Ugochukwu Uba was administratively installed. And so that forced Nicholas Ukachukwu to sue Ugochukwu Uba and his own party for his mandate. And at the Court of Appeal, the Uba brothers bribed the justices of appeal. They bought 2 out of the 3 justices of appeal who declared Ugochukwu Uba winner. Why do I say they bribed? Because this was actually found to be truthful. It was as a result of that finding that the two justices of appeal, Opene and Adeniji, were relieved of their office by President Obasanjo in the following year. Now, did anything happen to that case, having established that they were in fact bribed? No. Ugochukwuba went on to serve out his term. In that same election too, in Anambra West, a man known as Obanese Alphonsus Iweke also was declared winner of a seat in an election in which he was the loser, again by the courts. So this is not new. The only thing new about it, the fact that the judiciary had emerged to begin to declare pronounced winners in elections who were actually losers, or indeed pronounced winners and losers in elections, has been with us for over 20 years. But the scale of it now is so vast and so extensive that it makes nonsense of the constitutional provision that it is citizens who should be the people electing winners and losers in elections, and INEC declaring what citizens have done. This totally upends our understanding of democracy or of government with the consent of the people, and fundamentally transforms the nature of the mandate to rule. And so what this book tries to do, not just in the Nigerian case, but starting with a comparative insight from across Africa, is to tell us the things we take for granted are no longer that. And the implications of this, both for the mandate to rule and for the notion of independence of the judiciary, is what the book tries to explore.
Wow. The story you referred to, for some reason, I remember that case very well. Not as detailed as yours, the way you explained it. So, but now with the way things are, we have a new Chief Justice now. I can't remember the one before it. The one I think is the worst. Ariwola. Yes. Yeah. Now, in some of my past interviews with you and in some of the actions of the former Chief Justice, it does look like he even encouraged some of these things, and the way they were trading positions, judges, and all that. Now, what do you propose that can get the judiciary out of this current problem? Because it does look like, with the way things are going, after every election, the politicians don't have to worry about whether people vote or don't vote. The judiciary will be the final, that will decide who, like you said, in the selectorate. So how do we get out of this? Do you propose anything, maybe through the NBA, NJC? Because it doesn't look like anybody is doing anything about it. And even before you wrote this book, you've said so much about, the problem we have in our judiciary. So is there any part of the book you told us how to navigate our way out of?
Well, the first thing is before proposing anything, you first need to understand what is going on.
That's true.
So diagnostic medicine is very important, and it's the same thing here. Because a lot of people don't even realize that there is an issue.
I agree with that.
Okay, so being able to first understand the problem and then describe it in a way that people of discerning and curiosity can understand is the first issue, is the first level. And that's, again, that's really what the book sets out to do. So it's a book really about, it's a book about law, right? And jurisprudence. But it's not a book for lawyers. It's a book for citizens. So the idea is first to tell the story, to break it down in a way that any citizen who is interested, without making too much of an effort, can understand. That's objective number one. And so the book therefore starts from telling the story, and to understand why this is so, that why the idea of judges deciding elections is a problem, not just for judges, but for independence of the judiciary institutionally, and for us constitutionally as citizens, we have to go back to where the rain started beating us. And that story almost by way of symmetry begins from the origins of Nigeria's federalism, 1951, 52, 53. And so tracing the origins and evolution of that process is what by the time you then get to 19, and so how it started in the immediate pre-independence period, the immediate aftermath of independence, which takes us to the Western Regional Crisis, Adegbenro and Akintola crisis, its impact on the judiciary, which a lot of people don't understand. To understand how the military, not just to understand military coup, okay, this happened and then military coup over, no. But the institutional methods of the military were forged in the case of Adegbenro and Akintola. Now, and I don't, we won't have the time. Anyone who wants the details of that will need to read the book. But interesting things happened. Two things. After they lost the case in the Privy Council in Adegbenro and Akintola, the NPC, NCNC government abolished appeals to the Privy Council. So they legislated the ultimate appellate court out of existence. That's the first thing. Nigerians will remember, we became a republic in 1963. They will not know that the way we became a republic was in response to that becoming a republic was actually the response of the ruling government then to a case that they lost. All right? But there was something else they did. They also abolished the Judicial Service Commission. And so why did the Judicial Service Commission was supposed to be responsible for appointments to the judiciary, making them independent, making sure that proper people were vetted and nominated. They abolished it, and the politicians took direct interest in judicial appointments. That is the origin that's the original sin in this thing. And the person who was responsible for all of that as Attorney General of the Federation was a man called Taslim Elias.
Oh, wow.
Professor Elias then was the person who advised the military in 1970 to legislate their power into existence by abolishing the decision of the Supreme Court in the Lakanmi case. That abolition of the Lakanmi decision exactly reprises what the NCNC government did in 1963 in Adegbenro and Akintola's, in abolishing Adegbenro and Akintola's case. And 2 years later, Taslim Elias became Chief Justice of the Federation. Do you see how the story begins to now evolve? So it is this history that we first need to understand that when you are told, we used to have independent institutions, that was actually not quite accurate. And the underlying message of the book is independent institutions are fought for. The independent institutions are politically designed and politically willed into being. And to do that, you need a critical mass of citizens. You cannot abdicate it to the Nigerian Bar Association or to judges who are all self-interested and expect all of a sudden to have independent institutions. It's a political project. And laying out the case for why this has to be a political project is what I try to do in the book. There will be some aspects that are technical, but ultimately, the country needs to decide whether independent institutions are good for us or not good for us. That is the central issue. So parts of that can be technocratized and technicalized, which I try to do, but ultimately we've got to address a political challenge about the kind of institutions we need for the kind of country we want to create.
So, I mean, we've seen I've understand the thesis, and the historical context. So can we talk about reforms and solutions? Because I know you addressed almost everything. So,
yes. Well, first of all, what are the issues right now? Are we getting the right kind of people into the judiciary? First of all, okay, there is something called independence of the judiciary, right? Now, independence of the judiciary is a human right, it's a fundamental right under the Constitution, Section 36(1), which says that everyone is entitled to a court constituted in such a way as to guarantee its independence and impartiality. That's a constitutional right. That constitutional right is endangered once the primary thing judges do is to be adjudicating elections. Because when judges begin to be deciding elections, as you said at the beginning, in your chapeau, what happens is that politicians no longer want to campaign to the people. They now want to buy judges. And that means independence of the judiciary becomes compromised institutionally. Elections become places where judges and politicians do deals and business. That's what we've been reduced to. But as a result, that means what? The constitutional right to independent judiciary is intergenerationally compromised. And when that happens, it means you and I can no longer go to court. If we go to court, we are going to be stuck there until we die. That is why Afe Babalola could not afford to sue Dele Farutimi, because when you are in your 90s and you go to sue for defamation, the person whom you sue will keep you in court for 15 years. If you are 92, 93, you don't have 15 years to spare.
Absolutely.
Right? And the person will not just keep you in court for 15 years, but they can use the process of litigation to spoil your name even the more. That's why he could not sue Dele, and therefore they resorted to that business of abduction and all the rest of them that you saw in that case. Therefore, the first thing we've got to do is address the quantity of material that goes into the judicial process at the end of elections. That's the first thing. That cannot be done easily the way we do elections right now, because to do that, INEC needs to get its act together. And when you look at the sequence, okay, in 2007, about 86.35% of cases of offices decided ended up in court. That came down to about 54.6% in 2011. It further came down to just under 45% in 2015, meaning electoral administration was improving. In 2015, Goodluck Jonathan did not go to court to contest the outcome of the elections because he realized he lost the election. By 2019, however, the quantity of offices that went up for judicial determination went up to about 58%. And right now, with the last elections, we are back to over 82%, nearly the same level of electoral dispute resolution numbers as we had in 2007, which tells you dramatizes exactly the problem of judicialization of electoral outcomes. And you cannot have judicialization of electoral outcomes without politicization of the judiciary. The two go together. So that means we've got to improve electoral administration. The other thing we've got to do is improve the quality of people whom we appoint as judges. But many of those bad people are already in the judiciary. And judiciary enjoys tenure up to 70 years. So how do you address the question of the people who are already there at the moment? You do two things. One is performance monitoring. The other is discipline. Those are the two major issues, therefore, because it is through performance monitoring that you root out the ones who are unfit, and through discipline you root out the ones who are bad eggs, who are corrupt. Unfit and corrupt are the two issues that are now bedeviling the judiciary in the context of judicial selectoralism. The third thing is then addressing appointments. And how do you address appointments? Transparency. So if we address number one, unfit, number two, corrupt, number three, opaque, we will get somewhere. with the problems of the judicial system. We will not totally fix the issue, but we will make some progress.
Okay, so I'm looking at what you just said now. Who monitors? We have to monitor performance. Who does that? Is it not
all of this comes down to the National Judicial Council, which is itself part of the problem.
That's why,
because the National Judicial Council is just a reconfiguration of the acronym for the Chief Justice of the Federation, NJC, CJN. It's exactly the same letters. And then CJN pretty much entirely owns the National Judicial Council. So it becomes it could easily become what Nigerians call paddy business. And the paddyization of NJC business is what has got us here. Look at the Ariwola in particular was destructive of the capacities of the NJC. The NJC design assumes a decent paternalistic figure. But when you put it in the hands of someone who is neither decent in that institutional sense, nor paternalist or avuncular in that old paternalistic sense, you end up with what Ariwola did with the NJC, convert the institution into basically a network insider dealing mechanism for shooing in those whom they know, either on grounds of political association or on grounds of filial association or on grounds of genital association or on grounds of a mix of these three. And we got a judicial appointment system that actually made a mockery of what the judiciary should be while he was Chief Justice.
Wow.
And you see, when you then have those people deciding your elections, you're in trouble.
Big trouble.
Precisely.
Very big trouble. As a matter of fact, when you look at discipline too, it's still the NJC. Because that was the second point you make. And when you look at addressing appointment, it still boils down to the politician and partly NJC too. So what role does the NBA play in all this? But they don't look like they're the only body
that... Strictly speaking, the NBA does not have a role.
The role, okay.
However, strictly speaking, now, two things. Again, people have to read the book for the details. The NBA nominates members, 4 members, I believe, to the NJC. And invariably, they are the sitting president of the NBA and then others whom the person nominates, whom the Chief Justice then appoints into the NJC. Now, the judiciary has now evolved a really macabre jurisprudence that says members of the NBA cannot complain about judicial appointments because they themselves have representatives on the NJC. This was in a case decided last year in the Yahaya Bello, the immediate past governor of Kogi State, as he was leaving, got his wife nominated to become a judge of Kogi State. And this is where filial meets genital. And because when I say filial, genital, people laugh at me and I speak about the genitalization.
I'm one of the people that laugh, but it does make sense to me. Yeah.
Now, but this is a clear case of genitalization of judicial appointments because Yahaya Bello's wife had never practiced law. He had never been a magistrate. He had never been a court administrator. He had never been a law professor or teacher. All his law was practiced in her husband's bedroom and in her husband's kitchen. All right? When he was leaving, he got her nominated as a judge. The most senior advocates in Kogi State were astounded. So they took the extraordinary step of suing the chief judge and the Judicial Service Commission of Kogi State to stop the appointment of this woman as a judge. Now, what did they do? The case was decided by, I believe, Okona Bang, who is now a justice of the Court of Appeal, who said the MBA's members could not sue in the case because the MBA itself had members in the NJC And so if they wanted, any members of the NBA wanted to complain about judicial appointments, they should first go to the members of the NBA in the NJC, and it will be resolved in that manner. So throughout the case. However, because of the attention brought by that case, and because Yahya Bello had fallen out with the Tinubu administration over allegations of his roguery while he was a governor, and he had a case in court, ultimately the NJC found a way not to appoint his wife as a judge. But in terms of the decision-making precludes members of the NBA from suing to challenge judicial appointments because there are members of the NBA on the NJC.
So let me ask you this. I'm looking at broader significance now. I mean, how does the Nigerian experience with the Judicial Selectorate compare to similar phenomena in other countries, especially in Africa?
That is where the book actually begins. Because if you go around the continent, again, since about 2006, courts have been deciding elections in Uganda, for instance. In 2006, President Museveni almost assuredly lost to Kizza Besigye in Uganda's presidential elections. Benjamin Odoki, who was the chief judge of Uganda, and many people believe that the Ugandan Supreme Court was going to uphold Besigye's petition. Things happened in the 48 hours before the Ugandan Supreme Court announced its decision. But in the end, you had a narrow majority of 4-3 justices of the Ugandan Supreme Court deciding that Museveni had won. Now, it was a bizarre decision because all the major issues that Besigye raised in his petition were upheld. Was there rigging? The court held that there was rigging. Was there compliance with elections? No. Was there ballot stuffing? Yes, there was. Everything he complained about that had happened. But having found all of that, the court said Museveni won. All right? Now, of course, in 2008, 2007, Kenya went to elections. Kenya voted for a new president. And many people believe that Raila Odinga won that election against President Kibaki. But Kibaki was announced in the middle of the night as the winner. And Kenya went into an orgy of violence at the beginning of 2008, which ultimately ended up before the International Criminal Court, if you remember.
Yes.
As a result of which President Uhuru Kenyatta was indicted before the ICC, ultimately acquitted, and also the current president was also indicted before the ICC. However, why did Kenya go into an orgy of violence? Because Raila Odinga said he was not going to court, that the judiciary was too corrupt. Actually, he said the judiciary, to quote him, the judiciary was a kangaroo court. As a result of that, we ended up in a situation in which, following that violence, Kenya then decided enough was enough and ultimately altered their constitution by 2010, which gave them a different framework. Through that constitutional process, they fired the pre-existing judiciary and recalibrated the process of judicial appointments, which became totally different from what they had previously. In Ghana, after the 2012 elections, the case ended up in court. When the court announced its decision, I believe in August 2013, it initially said that the incumbent president, President Mahama, had won the election by a majority of 6-3. The following day, the Supreme Court issued an announcement that Mahama had won, but by a majority of 5-4. Wow. When they then issued their decisions, it turned out that 6 justices out of 9 had actually made orders for a revote in different constituencies, which meant that actually Mahama had lost the election in the Supreme Court by 6-3. Wow. But that was not what was announced by the Supreme Court.
Supreme Court. Wow.
Now, Bamidele Aturu, who was my former client before he became my friend, before he became a lawyer, who actually, Bamidele Aturu worked on observing the Ghana presidential election adjudication in 2013. And he also did observe the Kenyan adjudication contemporaneously. And he was the first person who brought to my attention the fact that across African countries, judges were beginning to determine elections, and we need to take that seriously. That what had started in Nigeria was taking root in other African countries. And if you look around now, Malawi, Kenya, of course, in 2017, the Kenyan Supreme Court overturned the presidential election. In 2019, the Constitutional Court of Malawi overturned the presidential election, affirmed in June 2020 by Malawi's Supreme Court. And that led to a lot of crisis in Malawi. Of course, ultimately, the president was fired by the people because the court ordered a revote. The president wanted to arrest the Supreme Court and change it so that the Supreme Court could help him rig the elections. The people of Malawi went to defend their Supreme Court against the president, and the president ultimately was chased out, Peter Mutharika. Okay? And the most recent elections decided by judges effectively was the election in Mozambique, where the ruling party almost certainly, the Frelimo, almost certainly lost the election, but used the Supreme Court, which they control, to give themselves control of the outcome of the election. So you're having this replicated across different parts of Africa. But it's not just in terms of elections. If you look in 2015, when he was term limited, the then president of Burundi, Pierre Nkurunziza, decided to extend his tenure and got the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court of Burundi, to proclaim judicially that he was eligible to run for a third term. I was involved in that case, and we took it to the East African Court of Appeal, which initially told us that we could not sue because the case had already been decided nationally. But eventually, we won the case on a technical point. But of course, by the time we won the case in the East African Court of Appeal, the East African Court of Justice, as to whether or not we could sue, Pierre Nkurunziza had already served out his 5 years and had been killed by COVID. All right. And so I could go on here about how the judiciary gets involved in all of these things across different African countries. But the disease has escaped from Nigeria, and the virus is all about our continent at the moment, big time.
Well, do you have any role model country in Africa that we can say, well, they seem to be getting it right at the moment?
Sorry. I
said, do we have any role model country, a country in Africa, for example, that the judiciary is above board at the moment?
Well, the Malawian situation is the closest thing to a story with a happy ending.
Okay.
Judicially speaking, which is a case in which a president tried to rig an election. The judiciary stopped him from doing so and said the election was conducted unlawfully and needed to be returned to the people for the people to decide. So the judiciary disallowed the unlawful election, but did not pick and choose a winner by itself. Okay? It said the people, that is the role of the people, so we return the election to the people. The president was unhappy with that because he knew he had lost the mandate of the people. So he wanted a Supreme Court that would continue to ensure that the people did not have control over the outcome of the election. He then wanted to fire the Chief Justice of Malawi and the senior-most justices of the Malawi Supreme Court. The people of Malawi and the Malawian judiciary said, no, you cannot do that. Certainly not on the eve of this election. And you can understand why the president wanted to fire the Chief Justice who was independent, Andrew Nyirenda. If he had fired Chief Justice Nyirenda, he could have been able to appoint crooked judges with whom he could do a deal so that even after he lost the election, the Supreme Court would pronounce that he had won and would have returned Malawi to the path of Judicial Selectorate. Okay? Now, when that happened, the judges resisted, and they People went to the streets to defend their judiciary and their Supreme Court. As a result, this president had to back down. The election had to take place under the judiciary as it was. And what then happened was the president was overwhelmingly defeated in the election and did not have the opportunity to go to the judiciary because he knew he did not have the kind of judiciary who was going to enable him rig the election. So Malawi is the exception that validates the rule. Now, where does this judicial selectoralism begin to bite? It bites when judges become the people who decide winners and losers of elections. Now, the role of judges in electoral dispute resolution should be very discreet and restricted. Call the rules, pronounce on whether the rules have been properly applied or not and followed. If the rules have been followed, you say so, and the elections stand. If the rules have not been followed, you say so, and you say go back and follow the rules properly. That way, elections get returned to the people, and the people get to decide who rules them on what platform. Once judges begin to pick and choose who the winners and losers of elections are, computing numbers, because lawyers are very historically bad at arithmetic, computing numbers and deciding these are the winners and these are the losers, you know you have problems.
I know you said a little about the question I'm going to ask you now, but I want you to, elaborate more widely on it. What do you hope your readers, especially of those of Nigerian origin, take away from your book?
In one sentence, that the judiciary is too important to be left to judges, lawyers, and politicians alone. It is what happens to the judiciary is a matter for citizens. It's not, as a matter of fact, the people whom you should not abandon the judiciary to are lawyers, judges, and politicians because they're self-interested. So people should stop this business of, what does the NBA say? What does the judiciary do? No, it is our problem as citizens, and we've got to fix it. And the judiciary, therefore, has to be held to account in exactly the same way that we hold other institutions of government. The era is gone where we treated judges like gods. They are not that. That is the entire point of rendering this in language that citizens can understand. So you will not see where there to, heretofore, all those expressions that and all that Latin that lawyers write, which makes it impossible for people to read and understand. No, this is written in very basic plain English, and it is and it's also not doctrine. It's not told. It's not written as big, huge theory. No, it's actually a story. It's a story of the evolution of our crisis of a crooked judiciary.
A clarion call for everybody to read. The Selectorate, How Judges Topple the People. I have one more question for you, and this I don't know. I just had to ask you this because I read a lot of things you write, and I said, how does your experience working with organizations like you work with Nigerian Human Rights Commission, Open Society Justice Initiative, inform your analysis? I'm talking of your professional experience, what you've done in the past. How did that make you arrive at did that help you arrive at all this? Or you're just citizen, Professor Odinkalu, or it's your background that helped you break down the analysis or to read the book?
You never can tell. Providence has its way of preparing us for the things it sets us about to do. And so I can't rule out that those have been critical. One thing I know is certainly some skills or some narrative skills I certainly acquired through those experiences, unquestionably so. But I think my time in the National Human Rights Commission taught me one thing. People who are under the cosh are looking for where to get justice and how. They are not bound by, as lawyers, which I trained as one, we like to think that, going to court is the biggest thing. When I came to the National Human Rights Commission, we were getting like 32,000 petitions per annum in 2011. By the time I left, in 2015, we were reaching over 2 million petitions per annum.
Oh, wow.
All right. What had changed? Public perception of the National Human Rights Commission was different to scale. State governors were taking their cases out of court and taking them to the National Human Rights Commission. Senior politicians were taking their cases out of court, taking them to the National Human Rights Commission, or asking the National Human Rights Commission, why are you not taking my case? The president was referring cases to the National Human Rights Commission. It had never happened before. We had the commander of the Brigade of Guards coming to the premises of the National Human Rights Commission to testify in investigations that we were doing. All right? What had changed was just public perception of the credibility of the commission was off the charts. Why was that so? People believed the National Human Rights Commission could shift the dial.
Wow.
That's it. And it is the same thing here. And this is what I'm trying to, that particular experience did certainly affect my outlook on adjudicatory credibility and what it can do to the metrication of adjudicatory performance. There's no question that if we had more credible courts, all of this election rigging would stop. Because INEC would know that if they mess around, the courts are not going to be the place where rigged elections will be validated, unquestionably. But we are not going to be able to achieve that when the people who are determining elections have been placed there by the politicians as judicial cronies of politicians in order precisely to make sure that crooked elections are certified by the judiciary. And why is the judiciary certifying crooked elections? Because they have now created jurisprudence that says they are the selectorate that topples the people.
Yeah, I love the name. So, but I mean, that was supposed to be my last question, but something just came to my head now. The people now, I mean, reading your book, I'm sure more people will read it. And what kind of awareness are you expecting now? Now, when we start reading it, everybody's reading it, everything is now in public domain, we know we're in trouble already. So what kind of action should the citizens take? Is it more like going to court regularly or just shouting and just making noise about what has been done? Because if a judgment has been given by the Supreme Court, the impression, the general consensus is that it's final. There's nothing anybody can do against it. And we all know, you're giving example, I know one or two, I'm not a lawyer, but of judgments that have been given by Supreme Court that we know that's not even applicable to law. You know, so what advice do you have for the people? Okay, now we're ready to take the bull by the horn. What can we do about those bad judges? What can we do about those bad court decisions?
This is really the point here. That you know, it's lawyers and crooked politicians who tell you, oh, once the Supreme Court decides, nothing else can be done. At one level, that is mostly heuristic, to be perfectly honest with you. It's very convenient. The fact is, we are before courts of law, which is the Supreme Court. That's the ultimate court of law. But even more than courts of law, we are before courts of public opinion, and before courts of posterity, and before courts of the Lord. I'll give you one example, not from Nigeria. A lot of people talk about Brown v. Board of Education. Do you know what happened in Brown v. Board of Education? No, Brown v. Board of Education was argued before a segregationist court, headed by Chief Justice Vinson. Okay? On the eve of the judgment, Chief Justice Vinson had a heart attack and died. Okay? The case was argued under President Truman, actually, initially. Then, Dwight Eisenhower was elected, who was a general, and who had commanded troops, many of whom were white, a good number of whom were not white. And Dwight Eisenhower ran for the presidency, won the nomination of the Republican against the then governor of California, who was actually quite liberal. And when he became president and Chief Justice Vincent died on the eve of giving judgment in the case of Brown v. Board of Education, he appointed his former political opponent as Chief Justice of the United States, L. Warren. Okay. L. Warren got to the court, and his first act was to schedule the re-argument of Brown v. Board of Education.
Oh, wow.
If the Vincent court had given the judgment in Brown v. Board of Education, the likelihood is the 1954 decision was never going to have happened. But because he died and the Chief Justice changed, a court that was probably going to end up by a majority in favor of segregation ended up in unanimity against segregation. So, I tend to come at law with a sense of extreme hope and optimism that we cannot, losing in a court of law is not the final thing, because you have to keep arguing the case in the court of public opinion, in the court of posterity, and in the court of the Lord. Especially when you know you have law on your side, you have facts on your side, you have evidence on your side, you have equity on your side. And damn, on this particular issue, we have the Constitution on our side too. So the fact that crooked people, for the moment, are trampling upon what is clear should not stop us. Crooked jurisprudence cannot stop us from saying this and arguing for what should happen. We may suffer disappointment for some of the time, but we will not lose the argument all the time. Kenya 2008 shows us it can change. South Africa 1994 shows us it can change. And I try to do that in the final chapter of the book. That is to say, in the final chapter, which is titled Restoring Trust. But fundamentally, and again, the book is also supposed to make people laugh a lot. So you see there is a chapter, I think, there is a chapter titled Electoral Dysfunction. Now, and it suggests that, and it's supposed to kind of draw an analogy with erectile dysfunction in human physiology, right? Now, and erectile dysfunction can be cured. So electoral dysfunction can also be cured.
Be cured, absolutely.
And the people who will cure the electoral dysfunction of the Nigerian judicial system and political system are the citizens. So there is hope in the book. And it is really a story of how to discover hope from a dystopian, a narrative that could suggest dystopia. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Prof. Yes, the Selectorate. It's on Amazon. You can get it. For those of you, that's right. It's very easy. I'm looking at it now. There's Kindle, there's a paperback, hardcover. You should read it. Every Nigerian should read it. It lets you know that this problem didn't just start today. It's a foundational problem. It's always been there. But there's no time in our history. There's no better time, so to say, that we need to address it. It is now, because we're going towards another election. We might be looking at the wrong places. Well, the judiciary should be where the action should be taken. Professor Odinkalu, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for heeding our call all the time. Thank you for what you do. You're a true patriot. God bless you always. Have a fantastic time. And to all our viewers, you heard from the horse's mouth. You must read the book, The Selectorate. Not just Nigerians, Africa, wherever you might be. And you see examples from Kenya, Malawi, South Africa. Almost everything judiciary, jurisprudence in Africa is depreciated. So you have a lot to learn. Professor Odinkalu has written the book, The Selectorate. The judiciary should not be the final arbiter of elections. It should just not be. The Constitution is very clear on it. Thank you, everybody, for watching. See you next week, Friday. Bye. Thank you, Prof.